All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, it is Wednesday, so we are going to do some social, actually political episodes here, and we're going to start with the big beautiful bill and the back and forth that's going on the Republican side. I'll say Republican instead of conservative, but the Republican side and what that means for us and that, yeah, basically just commentary on the big argument there. Now, we might in this episode, depending on how long we're going, segue into woke right, emotional blackmail and stuff.
Yeah.
But if we go a little long here, we're trying to keep them a little shorter this time around. But if we go a little long, that'll be a separate episode.
All right, and I will try and maintain some level of coherent thought, but I'm in a not as much pain as I was yesterday, but I'm still incredibly uncomfortable and kind of groggy from all the stuff that I had to take because of the pain, because driving is a tremendous example of you've brought this up before about gee, what does all this anonymous social media lead to? And you've brought up before, we already have an example. It's called driving.
Mm-hmm.
Because unless someone actually wants to take a picture of your license plate, you are anonymous out there.
And even
And
then, you wouldn't be able to just have a cop go run the plates unless you actually were in an accident and they hit and run. So
exactly, it doesn't do anything, So okay, I saw your license plate. So what?
well, and
Did
even
I?
I got a story for even when you can be seen how comfortable people are inside their cars.
Hmm.
But I always talk about a good lesson in how powerful an emotion frustration is. Watch people on the freeway get on a two-lane freeway like we have I-10 here in between San Antonio and Houston. That's always under construction and usually is a tight two lanes. Uh, when everybody is just flowing, everybody's happy. Nobody's doing anything. They're just all in a flow going. But as soon as those two trucks, one passing the other at half a mile an hour more than the other one's going, block everything up. Watch how everybody behaves in their 2,000 pound death
Uh-huh.
machine. They start cutting in and out, cutting each other off, honking, tailgating each other. And it's like, it's just night and day from how everybody behaves. But I had one time here in my little town that I live in, this little suburb that I live in, uh, we changed lanes and I wasn't driving. We changed lanes and I guess we changed lanes too slow for the person behind us. And they started honking and pulled up next to me and started making like this, like he's going to shoot me in the head signs. And it's some 50-year-old accountant looking guy with his three kids in the back and wife in the passenger seat. And I'm like, what in the hell, dude? I mean, if you get out of your car and I get out of mine, you're probably 5'6" and 150 pounds of accountant, and it's not going to go the same. I'm sorry. You better have the gun handy.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was. I don't know if anyone else has this problem, but the
Not
Texas
making fun
drivers,
of accountants, anyways. If you're a buff
yeah.
accountant, good for you.
If
Each
anyone
son
else
wants
has
to be
this
an accountant.
problem where you live, let me know, because the thing that I see the most that drives me the most crazy about Texas drivers is being in the far right or left hand lane and suddenly deciding I need to make this turn or I need to make this off ramp right now rather than, moving over a mile back like a sane human being. I'm on my way back from the gym. I'm already a little sore because the way I structure my program is, posterior and then anterior and then an off day because the anterior aggravates all my broken bits. So I'm not feeling great, but it's
You have a
usual not
broken bit
great.
on the anterior of your body?
Uh anyway, go study up on your anatomy if you don't get that. Um somebody in I'm in the left lane on a city street. This isn't in a highway. I'm in the left lane, somebody's in the right lane and they decide I need to get over into that left turn lane. And they cut me off while I'm overtaking them. So I have to slam on the brakes because not only do they cut me off, but there's already someone in that left turn lane, so they can't get over anyway. So they like stop in the middle of the left lane and then decide to, oops, I can't make this turn, go forward and pull a Yui up ahead. And I'm like, you could have done that by just waiting a second and going, oh crap, I missed my turn and coming in behind me. But because you cut me off and there were squealing brakes and tires. That's how hard I had to hit my brakes. So I whiplashed.
Mm.
If you already have a busted up neck and you whiplash, it's like your neck and upper traps are on fire. It was not fun. And so it pretty much physically ruined my whole day and evening. And I'm still not feeling great today.
Well, let's go ahead and move on. And with the moral of that story being, don't be that person
Mm-hmm.
because other people are on the other side of that. And not only could you have caused even more harm than that, but someone did get harmed by it. And even if it just inconveniences them, you're still an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be that person on the road or on Twitter or X or on Facebook or any of those just because you can remain slightly behind a barrier or even
Yeah.
anonymous.
Yeah. It take that extra second, just that extra second to say, hey, do I have enough room to move over? Hey, should I really post this? Is this helpful?
Mhm.
Or should I give it a minute
Well, and
and wait and see?
on that note, all the arguments about this big beautiful bill, they're they're going hard. And when we
Yeah.
talk about we'll say the right, but I hate always hate using right or left, but it's probably the closest approximation to what we're looking for. More conservative fiscally, but also more conservative socially, and also the winning party in this last election. Uh, the big beautiful bill has created such a rift. I mean, everybody's as we might talk about here later, the woke right and everything. There's been that little bitty fight, but most of that's cultural. This bill has created a political divide because it is conservative in the way that it answers all the things he campaigned on, or at least a big chunk of the things he
Mm-hmm.
campaigned on, and it gets us back to normal in the excesses that we got in the last 4 years, but it is not very fiscally conservative at all.
Yeah.
It actually makes the problem worse, at least for the moment. So we've got the fiscally conservative people like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul fighting against it, and we have the socially conservative Johnson and all of, and even Trump himself fighting for it. Well, but and Trump, he needs to get so much done. I don't blame him. I blame the people in
Mm-hmm.
Congress because he needs to come through on his promises, and throwing money at it will get it done.
Especially the biggies of the deportations of the literal tens of millions of people that in the previous administration were just allowed to walk right across the border. And occasionally, when they were apprehended, they were cited and then released. It was a catch and release program. If you've heard that term, what that means is Border Patrol picks you up. They know you are here illegally. They know you broke the law, and they can summarily deport you. That is the law. Unless you apply for asylum, which is where the shadiness of a lot of these NGOs come into it, and even our own State Department of helping these people manipulate the system when they don't technically uh, fit the criteria for an asylum seeker or a refugee, but by telling you how the legal mumbo jumbo works, you can run out the clock. It essentially is you can get started in that process, which lets you get in the door, and then you just disappear.
Mhm.
Which is what the argument of, oh, there's no due process. Yes, there is. It's just the process is different. The process for an immigration court is different from a civil court, is different from a traffic court, is different from a family court, is et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the process that these people underwent is they were even either given a hearing date or they had a hearing and were then given a follow-up and then they never showed up. In the same way that if you don't show up for a traffic citation and you have a court date and you don't show up, you get a warrant issued for your arrest. Oh, there was no due process. Yes, there was. You had a court date, you didn't show up. Now you have a summary deportation order on you. That's the process. Well, that's what they are trying to do And this is why I said what flipped me on this big beautiful bill was the funding and the directives, not just the funding, but the directives to put some muscle and practicality behind the rhetoric. And for me, it was the Los Angeles anti-ICE riots
Mm,
of, oh, we have an existential crisis here because we have a whole bunch of people who are very radical and openly anti-American and foreigners. They should not be here. That has been the whole point of the angel moms, the people whose children were killed by illegal immigrants is, yeah, you can blame that on the system because you know what? Maybe that poor kid would have, been a kid and not paying attention where they're going and walked off the street, got hit by a bus. Maybe. But what's darn sure is if you had been enforcing the law, that person who perpetrated the crime, they wouldn't have been here. They
hmm
that would not have happened because they're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to do your effing job. However, I also understand that there are points of no return. You can think this is an existential crisis. We need to deal with this now and for future elections, future generations. But you can pile on enough negative stuff to go, okay, but we can't do that.
hmm
My concern is how much of as much as I like Paul and Massey, how much of it is performative? Because they have to know you're never going to get a real libertarian, fiscally sane
hmm
bill out of this Congress.
Well, but the threat of the interest of the debt outgrowing our revenue is extremely real, and it could happen in the course of this bill. So arguing that point is not very performative at all, because if you have a great
Mm.
point, is it performative? Even if you perform well?
Well,
Uh,
here's my problem with that point, which is if you go to usdebtclock.org and you can see in real time the national debt going up.
mhm,
Um, you see federal spending, you see federal budget deficit, and you see the total national debt. And you literally can't keep track of the numbers. If you sit here and stare at this, it's like the scene from the Matrix where you just see all the code just, cascading down. And it's like, how do you even make sense of that? Well, you get used to it. Well, it's hard to get used to this. And what this does, all of these horrible numbers skyrocketing, but what this doesn't show is unfunded liabilities, which I've talked about before, which is the promises made
mhm.
under current Social Security and Medicare law. How many people who aren't yet on those programs but will be on those programs? That number is ludicrous. That number is over $100 trillion. So where performative may be too negative, too demeaning, but the point being, look, this one bill probably isn't going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back because the back's already broken.
Mhm.
You know, oh, who did I
Well,
say? The
let's
Democrats are
yeah.
caterwauling about how it defunds Medicaid, and all it does is target people who shouldn't be on the program in the first place.
Yeah, and there was something with a matching program where it knocked it from 90 to 80% or something. So it
Yes,
wasn't
exactly.
the biggest thing. And the person I was listening to talk about that used a lot of I dabble in economics, but there's a language to it that and she excuse me, she went a little further than I could understand. But let's go into the two main arguments there from those sides, and then we can talk about how personally I think it could have been done better by the leaders of the House and Senate and our POTUS as well. The first the good argument on the we got to get shit done, excuse me, stuff done killing our algorithm here. So I might already said it. We got to get shit done. Is immigration,
Mhm.
because that is the biggest spending increase of the whole thing by far. Not even close to anything else.
And that has both direct and indirect effects on the American people. You have the direct effect of what mass illegal immigration, mass illegal aliens do to uh, government budgets, of having to deal with that, but then the indirect effect of what does that mean for the American worker and their wage and their ability to get a job. I meant to say that last time when we were talking about illegal immigration is anecdotally for myself. So when we first started college back in the late 90s, we could get grunt work. I don't remember if you ever went with me with this guy I met through our landlord who we did some work for, and he would hire me just as what we would call guerrilla work. Is just you got a strong back and you carry things, unskilled physical labor, and he would pay $100 a day. And sometimes that was a full 8 hours a day. Sometimes that was only 5 or 6, but he would pay $100 a day because he
That's
needed
still a good
strong
wage at eight
backs.
hours a day.
Exactly. Even
It's,
at
I
a
mean,
full
that's
eight
$12
hours.
an hour. Yeah.
Well, a few years later, it was 50. And then a few years later, it was, well, I might could use you for a couple hours for $20. And then a few years after that, it's there's no work to be done. That is a direct result of an influx of cheaper labor.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what that is. That is exactly where that came from. And that is what um the populist right has latched onto with both legal and illegal immigration and these trade deals.
Well, and here there is a cheaper solution than what's in the current bill. You need to go after that guy, not all the laborers.
Mm-hmm.
And we need examples made. I mean, I mean, maybe a slap on the hand at first, but you do it again. Now we're getting a little bit more. It's the old, you repeat offend, you get a worse.
Yeah, we've been hearing about these ICE raids to round up people for deportation, but I haven't heard anything about, well, all right, you showed up at a meatpacking plant and arrested, 40 people for deportation. What did you do to the meatpacking plant?
Mm-hmm,
Did you investigate them? Are you currently investigating them? I mean, I would be happy with a we can't comment because it's an ongoing investigation. Okay, cool. At least I know there's an ongoing investigation.
mm-hmm.
And, and to your point, this is where the pushback on both illegal and legal immigration comes from are these people who say, well, we can't get Americans to do these jobs. No, no, you can't get Americans to do those jobs at that price.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so the bright side of this financially, let's speak fiscally, immigration is the biggest part of that bill from a cost standpoint. But if we allow all of these people to stay that are here illegally, and we're just going to say some of them would be productive citizens if they were here the right way, but most of them are going to be a cost on the country. So, what is the cost of doing a mass deportation versus the cost of taking care of these people for a long period of time? And that's the argument we're not having
Yes.
because the debt clock's going up but we're also spending money on these people because they don't have homes. Even if they do those low wage jobs, they're going to need assistance because have you seen the housing market?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen what land costs? Have you seen what apartment costs? You have to have one of those three. What other option is there to live other than those three? A tent city and under an underpass? That's about it, right? So, what is the cost of every one of those people? Look at what New York has spent on them and Chicago has spent on them. That's a big chunk of that cost going up that you said right there. Okay, so there's that. So that's a plus for the we need this bill side because yeah, it costs money now, but it saves us money later. Okay. On the flip side, are there better ways to have done it? Like I said, get rid of the cash cow for them. If they have nowhere to work, they're going to go back. on their own. They're going to take that
Mm-mm.
deal that was offered. That is, go back on your own and you get this much money and a free ride out of here to a
And,
nice place.
and you already see some of that if you've seen any of these stories talking about border crossings are at practically zero, and see some of the anecdotal reporting on self deportation of I've seen it, living driving in Texas and Oklahoma, and you see a truck or vans full of Hispanic people and a lot of stuff, and they are all headed south. And it's because if we are actually enforcing the law, if you are deported, then depending on your circumstance, you can't even apply to get into the US for a work visa or a green card or whatever for up to 10 years, depending on the circumstances of your deportation. So they don't want the hassle, they don't want the expense, and they don't want it on their record because they may want to try and come back. So they're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there you go. Hey, look what happens when you actually enforce the law. And that is the part, to your point, of where the messaging is getting muddled. Um, and I think that is a part of, and where we might eventually segue into the woke right. One of the problems I have with Trump, even though I understand it now more than I did, is his bombastic all or nothing methodology. And this is partly his personality, I guess, as yeah, he's a businessman, but part of that business is showmanship
Mm-hmm.
because he's selling himself. He is his brand. Trump is labeled on everything he does. On his real estate towers, it's all Trump Tower, Trump whatever. He's selling himself. So part of the salesmanship, though, is an all or nothing. You're either you or this thing is either the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever, always. Well, the problem with that all or nothing rhetoric is it lends itself to all or nothing thinking.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was talking with a client earlier about how deportation should go, and he was talking about numbers in places, New York City, Chicago, and everything.
Mm,
And he said, we just need to focus everything there and just go in and round up. And I said, what about an alternative approach? What about you take care of the constituents that voted for you
hmm
first and let those places become shitholes that welcomed it, that are calling themselves sanctuary cities and all that, and take care of everybody else first? Because we
Alligator
will,
Alcatraz.
well, because we will cooperate, which lowers the cost.
Exactly.
But also, there has to be a second part to this. Currently, certain states, currently, you're allowed to count illegal populations towards the congressional seats.
hmm
The Congress needs to say, okay, well, we're not going to do these ICE raids in these places because you're a sanctuary city. Okay, give them that one little thing. But, oh, we just passed a bill. Illegals do not count for the census,
As well, they shouldn't.
as they shouldn't, because they're not citizens. So
Because the
they don't
whole
count for
point of the census is to apportion congressional seats for elected representatives. Well, why are we counting people who cannot legally vote?
Yep.
That makes no
Well, I
sense.
mean, not even legally vote though. I would say if you're here on a visa, you could count. If you're here on a green card, you can count because you're here legally. And you are subject to the representation of that district. If you're here illegally, you're not even paying taxes, okay? Because you can't get a job that has a W-2.
Not without stealing someone else's identity, not without getting a false or fraudulent or someone else's social security number. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're paying taxes, you're represented. If you are not paying taxes, you're not, and that takes care of that problem. Now, what you'll see in some of these states is they'll try to do a mass social security, legalized a work permit type thing for all of these people. But at the same time, that still takes a lot of time too. And they're going to have to spend a lot of money on that. So the state will end up running out of money. The other,
that's California right now. California is asking for a bailout, but why? Why should the rest of the country bail you out when you're spending billions of dollars on high-speed rail boondoggles, and even
Mhm.
more billions of dollars in the main thing they need a bailout for is, so Medicaid is a federal program, but it is run by the individual states. So basically, Medicaid federally block grants to the states, who then and Medicaid then pays for it is basically healthcare welfare, right? Well, part of what where the costs come in is when you have um poor and especially illegal immigrant people filling up your emergency rooms as their primary care facility and then not paying their bills. Those hospitals need to be paid
Mhm.
in order to stay open. A lot of that
Well, which
comes
is
from
something
Medicaid
which,
funding.
which is something that the market should be able to handle if we had better free markets, because hospitals are mostly privately owned. They should be able to. There's the whole you cannot deny service. You should be able to deny service. I'm sorry.
If it's not
That sounds harsh. Yeah. If it's
if it
not
is
life
not
threatening.
life
Yeah.
threatening, you
Sniffly
should be able
nose.
to,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they can't. So that, to your point, one of the it is yet another illustration of how messed up the American healthcare system is that it is mostly privately owned,
But it is mostly
publicly
federally
funded.
subsidized. Yeah. Publicly
Yeah.
funded. Yeah.
It is mostly publicly funded because most funding is Medicare or Medicaid. So,
Which, if you've ever been to a doctor and there's a whole lot of bullshit with your insurance company, it's probably because of a Medicare Medicaid law that the insurance company is reacting to.
yep, yep. Anyway, back to your point. I think I derailed you about the messaging on this bill and where. Well, oh, so while you're
Well,
collecting your thought,
no, no, yeah, I have my thought, but go ahead.
so another point that I'm seeing made, and I wish would be made more, is I mentioned that this isn't a budget, this is a reconciliation. And if you want to get wonky, you can go into the weeds on what that means. But something I forgot to mention when I talked about that last time we talked about the big, beautiful bill is that one of the differences between reconciliation and a budget is you pass a budget once a fiscal year. If you pass a budget, which, like I said, I don't think we have technically passed a budget since 2012 or 2013.
Just like we haven't legally been in a war since World War
Yep.
II, but you know,
Yep. But on the flip side, you can do reconciliation multiple times a fiscal year because it's essentially all supplementary. So why aren't we doing that?
mm-hmm.
Why are we having so many fights on one front rather than just pulling out the parts that matter and saying, fine, let's just do a reconciliation bill on these matters. Now you're going to have to
Well,
do some
that's
wheeling and
bringing me to
dealing,
my next point.
and
Yeah,
you're going
yeah.
to get some pork in, and you're going to get some stuff that you don't want or isn't relevant to the main things. But it would theoretically be a lot easier to pass if you could focus on just one or a few things rather than this everything that we're doing with the big beautiful bill.
Yeah, so that's where someone like Mike Johnson comes into this, because he's the problem.
Yeah.
He's the main problem. Okay, so I brought up now. Okay, so we talked about the pluses of the people who want this bill passed no matter what, and so maybe there could have been better ways to do it, and this could have been how. So let's go to the points that Massey and Paul, they're the two ones that I think aren't grandstanding. I think the other ones, the other two that voted against it, the lady from Maine, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. And then there was another one, but
Call it. No, wait. Collins is Washington. I don't remember.
Yeah, but Collins was one of them, wasn't it though?
I think Collins, Murkowski, they are frequently with the Dems in the Senate. I can't remember the one from Maine, but yeah, that's another one that's
Yeah,
frequently
but it seems
crossing the
like
aisle.
they're the ones that are my district didn't get what it wanted, so
Yep.
I want to vote against it.
Yep.
But that's so those are the ones grandstanding, in my opinion,
Hmm.
because they're trying to get their vote in their district, where Paul and Massey have been consistent in the entire time. They've been in the in fact, that's what's drawing Trump's ire, where he says he votes against everything, even if it's good. It's like, no, he votes against everything that ruins us fiscally, is what
Well,
he votes against.
most of what goes through Congress is crap. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to say I'm happy to say that person votes no on everything or practically everything because it's almost all crap, and it
Yeah.
has been for about 100
And
years.
he invented the Klux capacitor. So it is a self-powered maneuverable shelter for your chickens as they graze in the free range in your pasture, so they can't be eaten by hawks. So it's pretty cool. It's all solar powered too. And but no, where was I? Okay, so they're not grandstanding in my opinion. This is my opinion because I don't know them as people. The other ones that have these reasons for their own districts are, uh, but as you were pointing out, that's why I said you kind of pulled me in the right direction here. Why didn't we push to make them happy instead of trying to make the port Dems happy, the ones that got what they wanted to get it passed? Because you would have had the same vote. You got about as many on the other side as you lost on your side. And we could have done things. Yeah, maybe immigration, you could have said, we need this. We need this for this. And here's the fiscal responsibility of the future. But what else is in there that could have been cut? Elon is another big name in this fighting. How about everything he brought forward with Doge gets knocked out of there? Did it? No, that's why he's mad. But we didn't do it. Massey specifically, no, Paul specifically said, if you cut a lot of the BS programs that we have and wasted money, I will vote for this thing. And nothing happened.
Hmm. Yeah, that is, I've mentioned that's the problem with the Doge cuts is are they actually cuts? Because they're not cuts until it's in the budget.
Well, they're saved money in that department, but they're still giving that money to the department.
Exactly. So there was a new line there on the in the if you go to the usdebtclock.org, there is a Doge cuts or Doge savings, and then there's a per taxpayer, except again, that's not a saving, and it's certainly not per taxpayer until it's in the budget. And again, why aren't we doing multiple reconciliation bills? Because some of these things are 80-20 issues.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for all of the freaking out by the ruling class about Doge, what Doge was uncovering was wildly popular in that it was wildly unpopular with the average voter of, wait, we spent how much on what?
Mm-hmm.
So why not have that be its own reconciliation budget fight after the uh the ICE and DHS funding that is part of it. And if you wanted to also rope in there and call it an economic bill, then you could add into that, a sweetener for a lot of the Republicans and make it more difficult for the Democrats to reject it um, of adding in the tax cuts,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
of
I
making
meant to say I
permanent
meant
the
to say
tax
that on
cuts
the
from the
pro
first
side. Yeah.
first Trump administration.
Well, because they
So
made
if
them permanent.
yeah,
That's the big thing. Because
yep,
last time they made them, they were just a 5 year thing. So,
they have a sunset, and they
mhm.
are going to if they don't get passed. So our next tax bill
And for
next year
everybody
will
that
be more.
says MAGA is not middle class, I'm middle class, and those tax cuts are exponentially beneficial
Oh yeah,
when we do our taxes. Because I
yep.
remember before that, I've been doing my own taxes my own taxes as a middle class corporate LLC, but corporate entrepreneur since 2009 ish. And there's a lot of Obama years there.
Hmm.
And then there's the Trump years. And I know, I can tell you the difference. It is exponentially better. So Kamala, you lied.
this is my shocked face.
Yeah. Okay, go back to your point. Sorry.
No, I mean that was basically it. Is it's frustrating that we are having so many fights. It's
Well, that's the thing. Okay, so yes, reaching across the aisle is a good thing, but when it's not reconciliable, make your own people happy.
mm,
Especially as we saw in this last election, you make Thomas Massey and Rand Paul happy, you've destroyed the Libertarian Party. You have just gained the Republican Party 3% of the country for forever.
mhm.
And 3% is more than the margin of the last election. It was the difference in the last election.
Yes, 3% is a lot in increasingly close elections.
Mm-hmm. I think we beat that dead horse.
Yeah. The problem is we can't do this because of I don't know how I want to so I've read a number of think pieces lately on how woke right and James Lindsay are a scam. And I understand where they're coming from, but I wouldn't go that far because a lot of these people are saying James Lindsay anti-communist as he labels himself on X Twitter that the anti-woke stuff was just the camel's nose under the tent, and now he and his ilk are coming in to destroy the conservative movement from within. I wouldn't go that far because I do think his anti-woke crusade was earnest, but also, you know, like I said last time we talked about this, he's never pretended to be a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
He was a fellow traveler in this anti woke movement saying the left has lost its ever loving mind and we need to push back on this stuff because here are all the horrible things that are going to happen. And then those horrible things started happening. And now he is seeing what he feels is a similar movement or approach, or as he puts it, tactic from the right. And that is why he is calling it the woke right, because of similar tactics as well as a bit of similar ideology. Um, However, in the defense of the people criticizing him, I do see where he has a bit of a blind spot, especially when it comes to the Christian conservative movement, where he just automatically pushes back against that and is a little too free with his label of woke right.
Well, okay, so who was it? Brent Weinstein and uh Matt Naina. You might not know who Matt Naina is,
Doesn't
but
ring a bell, no.
he was the director of all the Evergreen
Okay.
series. The three-part series, not the long series that Benjamin Boyce did, because Benjamin Boyce was the one who was there getting the videos. But and he posted a lot of them, basically just clips of them. But Naina actually did a documentary, three-part documentary on it, using a lot of those videos. Uh,
And for those who don't know the history of the nonsense, Evergreen College was kind of a genesis of a lot of the um woke protesting that turned into rioting that was all based on
it
nonsense
was
on it CRT insanity and
was it
what these people
2017? I think 20, yeah, somewhere around there. And it was
yeah
a it was a crystal ball into the future of what happened after George Floyd is what it
yes
was. Yeah.
and that's what they were trying to show is this isn't just a college campus phenomenon. This has been going on for a while, and these people are now out in the real world. What you are
Yeah.
seeing here on a relatively small college campus, you are going to see in your town squares before too long, and certainly enough we did.
Well, and also it was a lesson in the fact that you cannot make these people happy, because it was the by far most progressive college in the United States. It was actually advertised as a progressive bastion for progressive ideals,
Mm-hmm.
and it followed everything they said. They were the origin of the Robin DiAngelos doing the stupid everybody get in a canoe thing, and the white people have to get out and carry the canoe, that kind of stuff. That stupid stuff. That's in the documentary. You just watch it for yourself. Matt Naina, uh, Evergreen University. Just search that. Uh, but where was I going to go with that? The Brett Weinstein and Matt Naina had a conversation with Matt Lindsay, and it's on YouTube. You can watch it, and it was labeled as an intervention because Brett wanted uh, Lindsay to explain what he's talking about better because he wasn't on board.
Mm-hmm.
And Naina agreed with most of what Lindsay said, but he said, "You're doing it wrong."
Mm.
And so it's a very interesting conversation. And I think hopefully Lindsay's a little better coming out of that because I think he was receptive to that conversation. Hopefully
Yep.
it wasn't performative. Uh, but no, he's right. And actually, a good source on this is Vocal Distance. He's a friend of all of theirs, but he's not as famous. And that's his Twitter handle or X handle is Vocal Distance, like social distance, but with woke. And he posted something yesterday that was a quote from somebody that was, "I would rather vote for 10 socialists in instead of one fascist." And then he followed up with, or 10 communists instead of fascists. And he said, that's the problem with this whole thing.
Mm.
The communist is equally as bad to the fascist. You cannot replace fascism with 10 communists and be good. He said, we have to find a different option. We don't need the fascists or the communists. We need the rational human being that believes in free markets, but also social safety nets, that also believes in fiscal responsibility, that also believes in compassion. We need that. And neither fascism or communism are that. The problem with socialism, though, is people post things like socialism is not communism. No, it's not. Socialism is a different word with a different definition. But you cannot have socialism without communism because eventually, not at a broad scale. You can have it within a little 10-person commune, but you can't have it at the scale of the United States or the scale of the USSR or at the scale of even, I don't know, name a smaller country. You can't have it at that scale because eventually you have to force people to do things.
The Scandinavian countries, because when Bernie's rise to fame, he kept pointing to them as democratic socialists, and the people and heads of the Scandinavian countries got annoyed and said, "Stop calling us socialists. We're not. We
Mm-hmm.
have a large welfare state, but we are actually economically freer than the U.S."
Mm-hmm.
That the which is true. Um, I'm trying to remember who did. Was it Bjorn Lomberg? Somebody did a great documentary. And I think if you go to the Milton Friedman Institute, I think it's up there. Free to choose.org is their website. And uh one of the ones that stuck out to me that I thought was hilarious was where they were talking about the difference between yes, we have a large welfare state, but entrepreneurially, we're much more laissez-faire than the US is. And one of the examples was an inflatable bicycle helmet. So basically, a collar that has these cool shaped charges in it, and it senses a sudden change in G, so it knows if you're falling over. And it, boom, it inflates and it goes over your head. They can't sell it in the US because the US regulations on what counts as a helmet are too stupidly specific, so they can't sell it in the US. And he's like, but this is awesome. It's you can bike, especially if you're commuting to school or work and you don't want to wear a helmet because you don't want to get your hair all messed up. Well, now you've got this collar, and so you're safe and protected if you need it, but you don't have this, and it's easier to stow. You stick it in your bag because it's much smaller. This would be great. And he's like, yeah. And the US is a huge market, but we can't sell it there because their regulations very specifically and stupidly say this is a helmet.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are small countries, and no matter how much the democratic socialists of the US want to say, see, their system works, they keep saying, stop calling us socialists. We're not socialists.
Well, and that's exactly like I said. We people who believe in fiscal responsibility, but also believe that there is a place for a welfare state. There are like you can have your cake and eat it too in some cases. Now it's complicated. It's not easy. It doesn't make sense to a lot of normal people. You know, you have to have like the right brains in the room, and you have to have not these corrupt pieces of shit we have in our Congress, but at the same time, it can be done,
This is
which is where
so
states' rights come in because,
I was just going
yeah,
there. Is this is why we have a federal system. This is why we have multiple tiers and layers of power that are all supposed to check each other. But starting in the late 1800s and then really accelerating in the early 1900s, the federalism became much more federal, and the federal government began to grow exponentially in size and thus power. And this is where even someone as smart as Elon Musk is susceptible to this kind of brain short circuiting that happens with what the woke. Okay.
mhm.
So one of the things I think that I haven't heard Lindsay talk about this, but I've been noticing when people use the term and are pointing out woke right, what a lot of those people are doing tactically is the same as on the left. And you brought up Evergreen and the never pleasing them. And part of that comes from an all or nothing mentality is we can't have nuanced discussions. It's all or nothing. And take J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling is a very liberal, philosophically,
She's a
politically,
staunch phase one, phase two, maybe even into phase three feminist.
but there is one issue where she breaks with the orthodoxy, and now she is a
That
witch
she
who must be burned at the
yeah,
stake.
that she's a feminist and she doesn't agree men are women.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the craziness.
Mhm.
So you see
I
that
love
on
her
the
tweets.
right.
I'm sorry. She's fantastic on X. She is intelligent with her jabs.
I appreciate Musk breaking with the Trump administration because even if you like him, anyone needs to be held accountable. However, I think he's falling into this all or nothing trap by saying, fine, you guys betrayed your campaign promises. This bill sucks. I'm going to create a third party. First of all, third parties have almost never worked. There's only been a couple of times a third party has ever worked, and it eventually the reason it worked is because it supplanted an existing party. Okay, the Republican Party was the most successful third party ever, but that was mostly because it broke apart a previous party and replaced it. After Lincoln's successful election, the Federalist Party and went the way of the Whigs, who went the way of the whoever was before them. I can't even remember, or maybe it was the Federalists and then the Whigs.
The
Whatever.
carpetbaggers? Wait,
No, that came later. That was
okay.
in
Oh, that was
Reconstruction.
later. Oh, that was yeah, that's right. I remember now.
Anyway, rather than getting sucked into this all or nothing argument, where Musk would get a lot more bang for his buck, literally, because he is spending a lot of money in politics now, but then also bang for his buck metaphorically, because there's only one of him and he only has so much time in the day, is focus on what you said earlier about making these red states actually red in the ways
Mhm.
that count, in the ways that you want. Say, fine. I'm tired of spinning my wheels at the federal level because this Leviathan is so big and bloated. It is a self-licking ice cream cone, and it can't be reformed. It doesn't want to be reformed. I'm going down to the state level. I'm going to make sure that whoever follows DeSantis in Florida keeps pushing the policies that I like that he's done. You know, alligator Alcatraz, helping the federal government rather than hindering the federal government when it comes to enforcing immigration law. I'm going to make sure that Texas isn't just paying lip service, which if you follow Texas uh, House and Senate politics are ugly and stupid.
Hmm.
I'm going to make sure that they're not just paying lip service to this stuff. I'm going to make sure they're actually doing it. And now you have two major economies, populations, centers of power that have enough economy, population, centers of power that they can actually push back against the federal government when the
Well,
federal government
and there are
overreaches.
already mechanisms to push back, but we need our judicial system to also respond. Like Paxton could sue the federal government for giving subsidies to California for their shortfalls because we would be paying that bill
Yep.
because we're California is what like the eighth biggest economy in the world. We're like the 12th and at proportionally the same population if you break it down. And California's got an advantage that everything that ships to the West Coast has to go through California before it goes to a West Coast state, including Hawaii. They're getting that subsidy based on some stupid federal law that needs to be repealed. Those
Mm-hmm.
ships should be able to go wherever the heck they want to. But
Yep.
I mean, if that happens, Texas is probably a bigger economy. So if they need subsidies over there, we're paying for it. Florida's paying for it. New York is a lesser economy than us. They're asking for subsidies right now because they spent all their money on the immigrants, as we to circle back to what we were talking about before. And specifically New York City. The red part of New York should be able to sue New York City for wasting their money.
The other thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to the woke right or left or whoever is a phrase that popped up when I was listening several weeks back um, to the Steve Day show, and one of his minions used the term that the right has used before for a while: emotional blackmail.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that Musk is unfortunately personally very familiar with, because if you watch his Jordan Peterson interview from a while back, before he actually kind of more officially got into the primary or into the last election, he talked about his journey away from the woke left. What drove him away was what happened to his son
Mm-hmm.
and the emotional blackmail of, well, you've got doctors and care providers in your face telling you you must do this to your child or your child will commit suicide. You must do this to your child to save your child. And it was all a scam. It was all ideologically driven. It was all ultimately the cure was way worse than the disease.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about changing your transmission in your car. That is what ultimately broke him away from left leaning to the left is broken because of this emotional blackmail. Well, that is something that the right is tactically doing way too much.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I think people like James Lindsay are right to point out you're doing what you've been complaining about. Okay, whether it's the big beautiful bill or something else, and Musk is kind of getting into this same territory of, if you pass this, you're a traitor, I'm going to primary you, I'm coming after you, blood will be on your hands, the
Mm-hmm.
impending economic collapse, the hyperinflation, our children, blah 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 blah. The emotional blackmail short circuits the ability to have any kind of rational conversation.
Mm-hmm. Which is where X comes in too, because it's a very easy platform. Or again, all social media, X, Instagram, Facebook, even though they're both meta, it's easy to throw one-liners out there that will make somebody feel bad
Mhm.
or make you feel good about yourself.
And a great illustration of this, and by great I mean terrible and annoying and stupid, is the World War III that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The Tucker, Hodge twins, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, all these people whose names I wish I didn't know and who have way bigger platforms than we do,
Yeah.
were all we're all in on uh, Israel manipulates the US. Our foreign policy is way too beholden to Israel. And let's cross that anti Semitism line and
Okay,
let's.
here's where James Lindsay just needs to end his whole conversation about all of this. He said, as long as Nick Fuentes exists, there's a woke right. That's all he needs to say.
I would put Candace Owens higher on that list, but I think she has
She's
a
a
bigger
harder
platform.
argument though. Yeah,
She used to be. I think she is going hard over into the woke right crazy.
yeah.
And one of the and the example here is the just like who was it? Was it the Atlantic? You brought up the article years ago. Was it 2022 or 2023?
Mistakes were made. That
Mistakes
article,
were made. Let's move
amnesty.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's have a COVID amnesty, I think was
yeah. It was
the title of the
2022, I
article.
believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was in the Atlantic. And we were like, no, people need to be held accountable or this will just happen again. Likewise, guys, you can still say, well, I think we need to stay out of the Middle East, out of Middle East politics, and I think Israel influences us too much. But yeah, we were wrong about World War III and it didn't happen. And they're just doubling down and saying, well, it could still happen, or well, it would have happened if we wouldn't have yelled about it.
Well, it always could still happen. Realistically, it's not.
All right. So the final point I wanted to make about beware becoming woke wherever you are on the political spectrum is, like I said, a big marker to me of what made the woke left so dangerous and so unhinged and what they were was all or nothing. Now, you can have an all or nothing on a principle. The problem with their all or nothing is that when it came to the details, it was still all or nothing. It wasn't a back to J.K. Rowling. Okay, well, you're with us on all these other fights. We really think you're wrong here, though, but you're still part of the tribe. No, no, you must be excommunicated, exiled, and burnt at the stake. So you need to have some grace and some nuance when it comes to the details, and stop being so all or nothing on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the other one is the emotional blackmail. Are you actually having an argument? Are you actually having a discussion? Or are you trying to emotionally blackmail people? The warnings of this is world the hyper over the top warnings of World War III if we bomb Iran, and then no accountability of, oh well, I guess they weren't as tough as we thought they were. You have to have some accountability there, and that emotional blackmail was the exact same thing that happened to Musk and his son when
Mm-hmm.
one of his sons. Don't do that. The other thing is something you mentioned early on about no pleasing these people, and that is in part because Marxism isn't really an ideology, it's a tactic. And I've
Mm-hmm.
mentioned this before. That's why it was such a big effing deal that the founders of BLM Inc. openly declared, bragged that they were quote unquote trained Marxists, because that is a tactic, even more than, yeah, there is an ideology there. And that would be my final warning on where you're becoming what you were trying to fight, is that MAGA is in danger of becoming a tactic instead of a slogan which represents an idea.
I guess my closing thought on that would be that also deflects you from the real argument,
Mm.
because what we're seeing with the big beautiful bill is MAGA Trump versus more libertarian leaning Massey and Rand Paul. They're even calling them libertarians now, even though they're Republicans by party. But the real enemy is Speaker Johnson and all of the elite establishment Congress and Senate members that we have. Those are the real enemies. Those are the one Musk is fighting.
Hmm.
Musk is trying to fight them, but it turned out to be a Musk versus Trump fight. It turned out to be a Massey and Paul versus Trump fight. And they fell into it. Although I think Paul was really trying to point to what's going on in Congress and in the Senate, uh, just based on his own words from X. But to the public, it became these guys versus these guys when the real enemy was not even mentioned. And that virtue signaling, that emotional blackmail, is why you had to pick one of those sides or the other. Because either you're for getting illegal immigrants out or you're for the fiscal budget. It deflects from the point, and that's how powerful people stay powerful. We,
Yep.
we saw it back in the Occupy Wall Street Tea Party days. That's when DEI and Black Lives Matter and all of that just flung forward because they were distracting everybody from the real problem.
And I've said it before, and I want to say it again every time it comes up because maybe someone won't know this, but the Tea Party and the Occupy people were complaining about the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They just had a different idea on the cure for the ailment, but they were pitted against each other like they were two opposing camps when they really weren't. And that was on purpose.
Well, and that didn't even work. So then that's when wokeness was born. No, okay, it wasn't. That's when wokeness left the womb of the universities.
Yes, I was about to say that's when it went mainstream and left academia. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, because that was used as the weapon to break these things apart.
Hmm. Yep. Well, hopefully we will get some political sanity from the people because we're not going to get it from Congress because there's too much vested interest, way too much money being made.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
hopefully
and
we will
money
get
being
some
made
sanity
means
else.
money being spent on their campaigns, which means it's not going to change much.
Yep.
Because if you're listening to us, you're of 50 people. If you're listening to even like who's a good voice on this right now? Because I think even Tim Pool's kind of shifted to being all in on MAGA, even though he'll say, I disagree with this one thing.
Mm.
Ultimately, he's pushing the agenda. Trying to think who would be a good voice here. Maybe someone like Matt Taibbi or someone along those lines.
I don't know on the mainstream, but that's one of the reasons that the Steve Day show is one of my more I don't listen to it every day because I just don't have the time and frankly the emotional energy. Uh, but I appreciate that he calls balls and strikes
Mm-hmm.
as and that he doesn't wade into every controversy and every argument. It's yeah, I don't care. I don't care what that Trump said this thing about this person. It's irrelevant. It's
Mm-hmm.
irrelevant to my life. It's irrelevant to the country, frankly. Let's focus on the things that matter and let's call balls and strikes where we see them.
Yeah.
And so anyone of that ilk, wherever they fall on the political, religious, ideological spectrum, that's someone I appreciate and I want to listen to.
Yeah, I guess we'll leave it at that. We'll be back next time for Wheel Time episode, but we're going to be talking real life issues. So again, chances are you've come if you've had any romantic relationship, which is what we're going to talk about.
Speaking of emotional blackmail,
Speaking of emotional blackmail, if you've had any romantic relationship, tune into those because we're going to use different partnerships from the books to kind of illustrate some different types of relationship dynamics that work for different types of people.
all right, see y'all then.
All right, see you then.